Welcome back to Off Ball Takes. This is your host, Yarby Laws, and this is my co-host.
Christopher Wells.
We appreciate all the support on our recent content, and before we do get started, please don't forget to like and subscribe, and follow us on Instagram and TikTok at the OBT Podcast for more content and updates.
Yes, we are recording fresh off of a Game 7 performance. Funny game, honestly, right? But we both picked Oklahoma City to win this series. We did not pick them to win in 7. We picked them to win in 5. But this was what you needed to see if you're the Oklahoma City Thunder. Obviously, big news going into the game, right? Aaron Gordon was diagnosed with a grade 2 hamstring strain, right? Strained hamstring, right? Which was, I think Steph's was a grade 1, right? So Gordon's potentially was worse. He still played, gutted it out. You could tell, wasn't moving right. Battled, got a bunch of rebounds early in the first quarter. But it was scary initially for Oklahoma City because initially Denver played their brand of basketball. Oklahoma City offensively was pretty tentative. They couldn't really get stops. And the main guys like Jokic and Christian Brown were playing really well. Like I said, Gordon was out rebounding everybody on Oklahoma City with one hamstring. And then in the second quarter, right, it was do or die time, right? Oklahoma City was able to kind of close the first quarter strong. They got it, I think, to within 5 points. Then at the start of the second quarter, something happened, right? At the beginning of the second quarter, David Adelman he began the second quarter without Jokic or Jamal Murray. And Oklahoma City was able to immediately go on a run. And then that kind of allowed them to just kind of hang around, be in the game. And of course, by the time you've watched this, we all know, right? With about 3 minutes to go in the second quarter, right? Oklahoma City was up 42-41. So 1 point game, Jamal Murray scores on a mid-range jumper. And then from that point on, it's just annihilation by Oklahoma City, right? Chet gets an alley-oop to go, right? Christian Brown misses a 3. Jalen Williams then makes a 3. Then you have the stretch of just a bunch of steals and turnovers, right? Jamal Murray turnover. Christian Brown, right, gets the ball, and then Peyton Watson misses a layup. Then Jalen Williams goes on the break, pushes the lead up to 8, right? Jokic scores, then SGA gets a 3. Then Jokic, turnover, Jalen Williams dunked. Christian Brown, turnover, Jalen Williams running layup. And then by the end of the first half, right, it's pushed up to a 14-point lead. That's the game right there. And then from the rest of the way onward, Oklahoma City was able to push and build the lead up. They ended up winning 125-93, right, in a Game 7 that, ended up not being quite as dramatic as you might have thought, right? Just the first quarter and the first half, I guess, right? Up until the last 3 minutes of the first half. And like I said, once Oklahoma City was able to do that and their brand of basketball came out, that was it for Denver. Because by that point, they were running out of gas, playing on fumes, right? They had Caruso on Jokic. Of course, team defense as well, right? But they were forcing him into a lot of turnovers. They did play very physical, right? You can tell, obviously, they kind of let him play and kind of let him get away with a lot. But that's how OKC's played all season, right? They're a team that's a big part of their defense is despite the fact that they have a lot of smaller lineups, they're very physical. Now they also have bigger lineups to play around with as well. And they were able to contain most of these guys, right? Like, Jamal Murray, pretty much absent for most of the game. Now, that meant Christian Brown, first half, was able to kind of get going. But also Michael Porter Jr., right? Pretty much a no-show. And we know he's got the shoulder thing. So for Denver, yeah, they were banged up. Yes, they were tired and injured. But you still have to give credit to Oklahoma City because we talked about it, right? In this Game 7, we didn't know how it was going to look. And it didn't look very good, right? Despite Denver being tired and banged up. They had the lead in the first quarter, right? And then Oklahoma City was able to get it together and kind of, continue to play their game, finally start getting stops, figure out how to attack the zone, and then from there on out, it was smooth sailing, right? SGA at 35, but the real story of the game was Jalen Williams, right, who basically had 20 points in the first half and really was the guy that kind of turned everything around for them, right? And we talked about it, where in order for Oklahoma City to win, they needed to win going away. It was close in the first half, but by the end of the first half, they were up 14, right? If it was a close game, that favors the Nuggets. And Jalen Williams was able to show up. And this is a lot of pressure for him, right? Because we talked about the potential for, hey, he could be a guy that gets moved in a trade in the offseason, right? But he ends up showing up, and was the key factor in this game for Oklahoma City, and that's what needed to happen in order for them to win. Like SGA had 35. A lot of those buckets came, like when the game was kind of out of reach. He still played well and was a driver for their first half offense, right? But it was a team effort, right? Like a lot of guys showed up and came to play from the second quarter onwards. Caruso, right? Plus 40, right? The highest plus minus of any of these guys. And we know plus minus is kind of a flawed stat at times. But if you watch him while he was out there, he was incredibly impactful on both ends of the floor. And again, this is kind of one of those games where that's why it was such a huge win for Oklahoma City when they got him in the summer, right? Because obviously we know what happened with Giddey, where, good young player, but couldn't really help them out in the postseason last year, right? They left him open. He couldn't make him pay. Defensively, obviously doesn't offer the same versatility as Caruso. And you kind of wondered, right? Because with Oklahoma City, they still don't have a lot of options to go to in terms of shot creation, right? It's basically SGA and then J-Dub, right? That's pretty much it, right? After that, I guess Holmgren can put the ball on the floor, right? But it's still not the same type. And then Hartenstein, he can run your offense as a passer, right? But again, not really a creator necessarily. So for them to win this series, it was going to come down to, could they be able to contain Denver defensively, be able to get out in transition and use their depth, right? Because again, they're able to play, like 8 guys, right? Like they didn't play as many guys in this game. Like Jalen Williams didn't really play a whole lot. The smaller, the big, not smaller, the big. Isaiah Joe was kind of out of the rotation at this point in this series. But, when you looked around at Denver, really basically it came down to 5 guys, right? And one of those guys was taken out because Gordon, just couldn't give them a whole lot offensively like he could in previous games because of the hamstring. Murray was bad. Porter was awful. You really didn't get anything out of Russ, right, in this game. And Peyton Watson was atrocious, right? So it kind of came down to a lot of the flaws that we knew that this Denver team had. They reared its ugly head in this game. And that plus how well Oklahoma City played in the second half, right? And we've seen this many times over the course of the season for OKC, right? Where they'll turn a close game into a blowout in the blink of an eye. We've seen them do that many times. You just kind of wondered, would it happen in the playoffs? And they had a couple of games, right, where they won it running away, right? 2 in the first round. Then it was game 2 against Denver. So you wondered, because it felt like games 1 and 3, you couldn't give those games away if you lost the series. But they were able to bounce back in games 4 and 5, blew it in game 6, but then in game 7, perfectly fine. And we talked about how this was the potential to be a great opportunity for them because Denver still pushed them to the brink, right? Because this could have easily turned in a different direction if OKC didn't, perform in the second quarter the way that they did, right? Because like I said, in the last 3 minutes of the first half, before that, it was a 1-point game, right? That's not the type of game you want to be in if you're Oklahoma City. But now you were able to win this going away. And, now you're set for the next round. You're going to play Minnesota, who's also a very good team in their own right. They've gotten to the conference finals in back-to-back seasons, right? But, if you're OKC, Minnesota's a very different matchup. But I guess we should probably talk also from the Denver perspective and get into their offseason. But first, your thoughts on this game and what you saw.
Yeah, shout out to OKC. I think they, came out and delivered. That's all that we really asked. That's all that, everybody who picked them winning the series asked. And first of all, you do have to tip your hat to Denver to making this a 7-game series because we picked OKC in 5, but this game right here shows you why I think we did truly feel like Oklahoma City was the massive favorite going into the series, right? Because look at what they were able to do defensively, pretty much right after the first quarter. Once they kind of got their feet and found their footing a little bit, you could tell that this game was pretty much over. They didn't really give anybody outside of Jokic really a chance to do too much. Like Jamal Murray, he had his moments a little bit. Christian Brown, he had a lot of open looks, and that's what they wanted, right? They wanted to force, the Nuggets to kind of have to win by, a guy like Christian Brown scoring a bunch of threes, and that just wasn't going to happen realistically, right? So, shout out to them. They have great personnel with Oklahoma City, obviously, like I said, we love the defensive depth, right? Because going past, their starting lineup, right? You have Caruso, a guy who's amazing on both ends of the floor. You have Isaiah Joe, Aaron Wiggins, Kassan Wallace, all those guys, like, right? Those are defensive stalwarts, which is amazing, right? And they're also finishers because that's the cool thing about Oklahoma City. Once they kind of, get deep into their play design and their bag in terms of that, like those guys, if if it's a good night, they're going to shoot, relatively well from the 3-point line. And I think that's the beauty of this team, right? Is to be able to be so good on defense, but also to be so good on offense. And, having a guy like Shea, it's a gift. And having a guy like J-Dub show up also is huge as well, because, this is going to be, their first trip to the Western Conference Finals. So shout out to them, in this game. Like you said, not really too much to write home about, I guess, outside of that first half, because the second half the game was pretty much over. They were running away with it, but everybody executed, right? Everybody came to play, and I think that's the great thing, because I think the problem was offensively, you could tell that they were having some really, really bad woes that they just couldn't really figure out. But being at home and, everybody kind of calming down, and it all starts with J-Dub, right? Because we already know Shea is going to get his, but if J-Dub and Shea have a good game and everybody else shows up, realistically, who's really taking this team in a 7-game series? And that's, I think, the logic that we kind of had looking at the Western Conference, right? We thought that Oklahoma City's going to represent, the West in the finals, and, they have one more series to do that.
Yeah, exactly. So it all comes down to, can they, could keep this going and beat Minnesota, which is, again, a different team than the Denver Nuggets, right? But yeah, like you said, it's super impressive, just the fact that the game looked like it was getting away from them early,
Yeah.
and they were able to, like you said, kind of calm down, regain composure. But again, it's like, when you look at what Denver was doing, like, yeah, like this is why we picked Oklahoma City to win the series. I think, again, it's tough that it wasn't as decisive or as dominating, but it ended in decisive fashion, right?
Sure.
It's not how you start, it's how you finish, right? Because they could have easily. There were several times, right, in the other games, right, games 4 and 5, where they were down in the fourth quarter. You lose either of those games, your series is done,
Right.
right? Because game 4, right, they were down 2-1. They were trailing in the fourth quarter, right? Because that was the game where nobody could hit a shot for most of the game, right? So you got to see, like, over the course of the series, they were able to kind of figure some stuff out, and this is why last year their loss was tough, and we actually picked them to beat Dallas in that series, but they weren't ready. But now this looks like a team that, obviously they made improvements in terms of bringing in some more guys like Hartenstein and Caruso, but even a guy like Jalen Williams, right? Like, you wouldn't have thought, like last year, he wouldn't have had a game like this in a closeout elimination game, right? Game 7, that wouldn't have happened, right? But,
Right.
Him having a game like this is huge. And now, again, be prepared for him to probably still have, some other games, right? Like some of the games from the previous series, right? Because, defensively, right, Minnesota is a better defensive team, I would say, than Denver.
I
But
agree.
either way, these are the type of series wins and, individual performances where, if they, go all the way and win the title, right? Like, this would be a turning point where it's like, yeah, this is kind of when they, really had that championship look, right? Because it's one thing to do this against, like Memphis without Ja, right? I mean, I guess they did it with Ja, but like Memphis
I
was
know what you
not
mean. Yeah.
in the same. Memphis was not considered in the same tier with the way they were falling down,
Right.
right? Towards the end of the season, the way that Denver was, even though Denver wasn't playing well for most of the latter part of the season, right?
Mm-hmm.
But when you do that to Denver, and again, I know they were, banged up and whatnot, but still, regardless, very impressive Game 7 closeout win.
Yeah.
The question is, if you're Denver, where do
Mm.
you go from here, right? Because obviously, back-to-back second-round losses in Game 7, both in tough fashion, right? Now, last year's was even more brutal, right? Because of the fact that they were, because they had the 20-point lead in the second half and then blew it all. This one, the lead was gone in the second quarter, right? So it wasn't really the same. And I think with the reality of the new CBA, I would think this should probably be a different team come next season, right? Because of the fact that you have to kind of figure out, okay, none of your bench guys really showed up and were much of a factor for most of the series, right? And then even some of your supporting cast guys in the starting group, like Porter, right, was kind of in and out for the vast majority of the series, but mostly not very good, right? He had like a couple of games, but in all the games that they lost, he was awful, right? 6 points, 2 points, 3 points, 8 points, right? Like 3 for 8, 1 for 7, 2 for 10. And obviously he's got the shoulder thing going on. But even like last year, right? Like he had some games against the Wolves like that where he's just kind of just gone and he's not really there. And it's kind of harder, I think, to run a team like this with the new CBA now where that guy's making $40 million and you just don't really know what you're going to get from him on a night to night basis. And again, it's not all his fault, right? Murray wasn't great in this game either. But you just kind of point to, like, you're not moving Jokic, you're probably not moving Gordon or Murray, I don't think, right? So you can't, and then you'll have to pay Christian Brown, right? Then at some point you'll have to pay Peyton Watson. Was he in the same draft as Brown?
I believe so.
Yeah, so yeah, you'll have to probably at some point. I'm assuming that they still want to roll with Watson. I mean, I'm sure Brown they are cool with, but Watson is still kind of a hit or miss guy, even though like defensively he's fine. But and then even Strother, right? Like you got really nothing out of him for most of the season, and then for really none of the postseason aside from Game 6. So you still have like the previous front office, right? Like some of the mistakes they made in terms of the guys they let go, the guys they were hoping to replace them with, they hadn't panned out, right? Like no real Zeke Najee minutes because he wasn't good, no real Jalen Pickett minutes because he wasn't really good, no Hunter Tyson minutes because he wasn't really good, and then even like I said, guys like Strother also not very good, and then Watson, who's in like what year 3 or whatever,
Yeah,
right? Just
yeah.
not a ton of impact from those guys, but you kind of thought that was going to happen in Game 7. Like in Game 7, you kind of were banking on your starters to kind of get you home. So that's what I kind of wonder. What do you do? Like Michael Porter Jr. Is this his last game as a Nugget?
I think so.
Do you think?
Yeah,
And
I
then if
think so.
that's the case, what are you moving him for? Are you moving him for another star? Can you even do that? Like in terms of because you don't have a lot of assets, or are you moving him for like a couple of pieces that are like 20, or something $1 million players, right? And kind of doing like a 1 for 2. Could they go after like Kevin Durant? I don't know, but that's kind of the question. Like, what do you think they should do? I guess is probably kind of the ideal question here. Like
Well,
if you're Denver, because running it back, I don't think you can. I don't think you'd be able to get the title.
yeah,
Like I just don't think you're quite good enough.
and don't chase stars either. That would be another thing that I don't think that they should do. I think they should chase depth. I think that's clearly something that hurt them, especially, in the playoffs, right? Because you look at it and like you said, in this situation, we're talking about 5 guys pretty much, and some nights, in the first round, I think you had some good Russ moments and Russ games,
Yeah.
even in
Oh yeah.
this series as well sometimes, but a little bit out of control. I feel like so. I think
Last few games were rough for him.
exactly, and not getting anything from Peyton Watson hurts. I mean, you had a Julian Strother random legacy game out of nowhere, and
Mhm.
then pretty much nothing else before or after that. So I think you need to look at depth because we already know that, you know, championships are really built on defense, depth, and obviously your star talent as well. So those 3 things I think you really do need. And, look at all the teams that are still around, right? That aren't eliminated. They have a lot of depth. I feel like outside of what New York, I guess, right? Because that's a
But
little
their
bit different.
starting five is also like a really good starting five, and I
So
think there's
elite,
a lot
yeah.
more. And I think there's better two-way potential with that group than
Yeah,
Denver.
but yeah, I think the first step is going to be getting rid of Michael Porter Jr. and prioritizing some more impactful depth. I think that will translate into the postseason. So that's what I would do because I feel
Yeah, they
like
made.
you're fine with Aaron Gordon. I feel like he's proven himself to be
Yeah,
a very valuable third option on this team, and he fits the system so well. But you need something else.
yeah, that's kind of the big thing here is that I think like with Porter, he is a guy that can get hot from three. It's just can you find a way to turn that maybe into like a couple more guys? Because I think the thing with Denver is in this game and for a lot of the postseason, we've seen a ton of zone where it's like, guys and teams kind of, banking off of we're going to make sure that the guys that get off the shots over the course of the game are the guys we want. Like Westbrook taking 5 threes. You'll take that if you're Oklahoma City. Now he shot 40%, but still. Christian Brown, 2 for 9, right? We know that's kind of a weakness in his game. Whereas like guys like Jokic and Gordon and Porter, they didn't get off, a higher volume of threes, right? I mean, like Jokic didn't even really take a lot of shots anyways. And part
Right.
of that's the Oklahoma City defense. He had 5 turnovers, but just as a whole, that's kind of, I think, like you said, I think a good way to look at it is, can you turn, this roster, can you put a little bit more depth on the roster? It's just the question and concern is that, it seems like a lot of, Nuggets people, kind of worry about, like, what is, there's not a whole lot out of the, outside of your top three guys, right, that you can really consistently count on. So, is that the argument to potentially go after a star? But like you said, then if you go after the star, you still have the problem of, after that, what else do you have,
Yeah,
right? Like,
don't
you
go
still
after a
kind of,
star.
yeah. So that's kind of, again, I don't know if they have the assets to go after one,
No,
right? Really don't.
no.
It would have to be somebody saying, I want to go there, right? Like that, like, like say, and I mentioned Durant because I know I've seen that in different spots in terms of people talking about it, but like, the only way he probably would go there is if he said, I want to go there,
Yep.
right? It wouldn't, because like if you're Phoenix, like, I mean, you may not get a lot back for him anyways, but like, are you really going to be like, yeah, we got back Michael Porter Jr. and stuff, for KD?
No.
Not that they're going to get a ton of anyways, but, maybe you look at it as like he doesn't have many years left on his contract. Maybe that's how you look at it, but still, that's kind of the big thing, depth and defense. Although defensively they were better in the playoffs than they were in the regular
Yeah,
season.
I'm not really
They're still
concerned with
kind of
that, if you want me to be
right.
honest.
Yeah, well, like you still, the main thing is you have to get more guys, and you definitely have to get guys that have to be respected offensively, because
Yeah,
then it's a lot harder to just kind of like send a bunch of guys at Jokic if he can, if he's playing in alongside a bunch of other guys that can shoot. Like that's the thing with Gordon, where he was able to turn himself into an effective, really good 3-point shooter, and now he's a guy where you really can't leave him open anymore. You can't just be like, yeah, we don't care if you shoot. Like, yeah, like of course nobody's going to shoot great from three every game, but now he's a guy where you do have to kind of be concerned about, like, yeah, this guy can get hot from three
yeah,
and can kind of completely turn a game around. So that's kind of the big thing for them is, can they get some more legitimate guys to come off the bench that can actually give them, minutes, especially because again, like, when Porter's not playing well, there's really no one else you can really replace that with, because like say the title year, they could be like, yeah, we'll just put out Bruce Brown, or even like gamble with Jeff Green. But like, who is that guy in this one? Russ? Like that's kind of the, the alternative. And like
right.
in some games that was fine, but just offensively, right? It's still not we know he's not a great 3-point shooter. Like teams, will guard him in that way. And like he shot, I guess, fine from three in the playoffs, but he's still like not a guy that really alters the way that you have to guard Denver. And he shot what in the playoffs, 31% from three. And that's because in this series, he didn't make a lot of the ones that he did against the Clippers, right?
Yep.
So again, not his fault, right? He was placed in a role where they were very reliant on him, but they need more, right? You don't want to be in the spot where like you're kind of riding and dying with some of those guys, and that's the tough part of building a team. So I would say I think this team should look different next season if they want to continue to be serious about contending, and it probably will, because again, we didn't even mention it, right? They fired their coach and their GM, so in theory, you get a new GM. I don't know if they'll keep David Adelman as the head coach. I have no clue. I mean, like, did you see, I mean, I guess it's kind of hard to say because, the team is the same, but like, were there things that you saw from him that would make you feel fine with him being the head coach?
I
Or like,
mean,
would you just
I mean,
kind of go, I don't know the names out there. You know what I mean? So like, that's kind of the tough part.
I mean, from what I saw, I thought it was a little bit more negative than positive. If you want me to be real,
Mhm.
I saw a little bit more animation out of the individual players, and that might be
Mhm.
because they just didn't really have a leader on that coaching staff. And I mean, when I heard him talk, I mean, I didn't really take anything negative away from it, but then like there's adjustments and lack
Mhm.
thereof that I think were kind of head scratching, but at the same time, I can't really fault the guy because look at the freaking roster, right?
Right. Like,
That's what we're talking about. Like
how
depth
many
wise,
adjustments?
you don't really have anybody to go to, right? So
Right, yeah,
it's
because
tough.
some coaches would be like, "Yeah, Strother's been bad all year. I'm not going to play him at all."
Mm-hmm.
And he did play him in a game 6, and it paid off.
Right,
But
right.
again, you have to bank on that happening again in the game 7, and in a game 7, is that likely? And it's like no. So like,
Didn't happen.
this was kind of the reason why. Like, I don't know if we were confident that Oklahoma City was going to win game 7, but I think we were sticking with our pick, and we felt like they should win game 7. given everything that has gone on in this series, right? It, like you said, it would have been a significant disappointment for them to not just lose the series,
Mhm.
but losing any amount, right? Because I just think Oklahoma City's a better team. Like, yeah, like Denver's got the best player or better player, but in some of these games they were able to contain him enough that all you just needed to do was just get some other guys offensively to come along for the ride. I know Oklahoma City is not a perfect team by any means. We know their weaknesses, but it's just tough. It's tough if you're Denver because again we looked at them a couple years ago as like a potential next dynasty, and now you have more questions with that roster than answers, right? Because they're probably going to have to make some changes, right?
Yeah, big
Same with
time.
Boston,
Yeah.
right? So now Oklahoma City moves on, play the Minnesota Timberwolves, right? Minnesota Timberwolves, obviously, they came off their second round win against the Warriors without Steph, except for 13 minutes of the series, but still, win's a win nonetheless. Um, what are we thinking about this series? Because I think we kind of talked about it because we didn't know who was going to win game. I mean, we picked Oklahoma City to win, but we kind of talked about the scenarios. I think if you're Minnesota, I think your preference would have been for Denver to come out of the series, especially with Gordon having to presumably play through the rest of the playoffs with a hamstring issue. But now you're playing Oklahoma City. I know in the regular season, both teams split. Clearly, regular season hasn't mattered a ton in terms of the matchups in the playoffs. Some of that's injuries, some of that's just it's the playoffs. Things happen. But I would still probably favor Oklahoma City to win this series. I feel like considering Denver pushed them 7, it's hard for me to like once again be like, "Oh yeah, they should beat Minnesota in 5." But, what are you thinking?
Um, I'm gonna go with Thunder in 6.
Yeah,
I think
I
they're
think so.
I think they're the favorite, but I'm giving the Timberwolves a ton of respect because I think I've
Yeah.
enjoyed what their postseason run a ton, right? I think I've loved everything that I've seen from them. And that's the cool part about the playoffs, right? Now we're pretty much guaranteed to have a new champion in terms of that stuff. So
Yeah.
that's pretty cool.
You got 3 teams, I think, right, that have not won a title, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah. So
Because you got Indiana, you got Oklahoma City,
yeah.
and then Minnesota.
Yeah.
So,
So big time stakes here, but
yeah,
I think the Thunder are so good, right? And I know maybe they didn't showcase it too consistently in
mhm,
this Nugget series, but I think this will be their time, and I think, going back to the last episode where that we talked about, right? I think the win over the Nuggets is a huge confidence booster, right? Because you
yeah,
just took down a team that has been to the finals, granted, very different in terms of the look and stuff like that, but it feels good to probably take down a champ, a guy like Jokic. And now you get to go face Anthony Edwards, who's been here as well. And the
mhm,
Timberwolves team, they're phenomenal on both ends of the floor. And I think Julius Randle is going to be the guy that you might have to try your best and hardest to contain, because if he pops off along with Ant, that's going to give you some trouble. And I think that's where the game 6 narrative comes into play for me, because I just don't think they're going to be able to handle them in 5. Just to give Minnesota a ton of credit for what they've been doing throughout the whole postseason.
yeah, and that's why I would agree with the 6th pick because I just think there was too much negative at times that we saw from Oklahoma City to make me feel like they'll just run away with
Right.
the series. I mean, of course, defensively, you know, the way that you would be guarding Minnesota is, I think, pretty different from guarding Denver, right? Because
Very.
with
Yeah.
Minnesota, it's not really like, not a lot of offense ran in the post necessarily like the way that you run with Denver. But it's a different challenge, right? Because Minnesota's got bigs. They have guys that can get downhill, right? Is even from the guard spot. Like Ant is a guy who can get downhill and attack. His finishing in the playoffs has been kind of mixed, right? At times it's good, but then there's other times where it's kind of an adventure, right? But Randall's been pretty consistent, probably the most consistent player offensively. Um, and that's kind of another element where that's another big punishing guy, right? That can attack some of the weaknesses defensively, right? And you're probably going to have, a guy, I mean, like, I'm curious to see what they do with the big situation, right? Like, what are you going to do in terms of like Gobert, right? Are you going to just keep Hartenstein on him? Are you going to put a smaller guy on him and kind of just bank on him not really hurting you offensively, right? What do you do with Randall? Do you put a big physical guy on him? Can you get Caruso minutes on Julius Randle, who's guarding Ant, right? I'm going to assume probably J-Dub is going to take that assignment, right, for different stretches, or Lou Dort. But That's kind of the interesting thing I think about this matchup. And then obviously like the battle of the guards, right? Because you got SGA and Ant. But it should be a fun series, I think, just from the perspective of, again, like Minnesota's not really what I would call like a super young team, but like obviously like Ant's a young guy, and they do have a couple other guys like McDaniels and others, that can be, pretty, entertaining younger players, right? And
Yeah.
then obviously OKC's the youngest team in the league. So they got that factor. And like you said, and like we both said, right? Them getting out of this series alive is huge because this could potentially be the toughest matchup for them in the playoffs. We'll see what happens from here. The thing is, Minnesota has a better depth uh, collection, right, than Denver
Hmm.
does, right? Like they have 8 guys that they've consistently felt pretty good about putting out there, right? You got the starting 5 and Conley, Ant, McDaniels, Randall, Gobert. Then off the bench, you got DiVincenzo, Naz Reid, right? Nikhil Alexander Walker. So those are like the main 8 guys that have been playing in OKC, but OKC is deep as well. So obviously, and OKC is a different challenge from Golden State, right? I mean, Golden State without Steph, but just it's a different type of team that you're going to be playing against. So I'm super curious to see how that all turns out. But, I think Minnesota defensively, like you got Gobert who can protect the rim. You got McDaniels who's a long defensive guy that can kind of pick up guys full court, play some pressure defense against guys like SGA, and potentially bother him. Right. And then Naz Reid is a guy off the bench who could give you 20 plus in a playoff game, right? Like we know he can do it. Even a guy like DiVincenzo, who's not been great this postseason, but he's been better the last few games, and there's definitely the potential for him to start getting hot. Just as another option off the bench. The thing that concerns me and worries me a little bit about Minnesota is just the turnovers
Mm.
at times against Golden State were pretty tough,
Hmm.
and I don't imagine that really being any different against Oklahoma City, right? Because that team, obviously, as we just saw, is great at being able to force turnovers, and they can really punish you and make you pay because they can get out and run. And Minnesota, because of the bigs, they're not always going to be able to just get stops in transition.
Right.
So that's going to be a big factor, I think, for Minnesota is continuing to protect the ball, winning the rebounding battle, right? Because, for Oklahoma City, at times against Denver, they were able to get some extra rebounding opportunities, but they also at times got bullied by Denver on the board sometimes. So, that's, I think, a pretty important part. And then Minnesota, offensively, they've got, I think, probably more volume 3-point shooting than Denver does, right? Like at a bunch of positions, like Ant can put up threes in a hurry. Even some of the guys off the bench, like a Naz Reid, DiVincenzo, Conley, not like a high volume shot taker, but he can be a guy that can hurt you from 3. And then the X factors continue to be Randall and McDaniels because Randall's been awesome for Minnesota this postseason. If he continues his strong play and continue to attack mismatches and not, settle and, kind of be the bad version of Randall, if he continues to do that, and then if McDaniels can be a consistent offensive option, like they could push Oklahoma City and potentially win this series. But I think for Oklahoma City, I just say off front, I think they have some more advantages defensively. And it's just again like it's different. It's different Oklahoma City with SGA than Golden State without Steph
I
because
agree.
I just think Golden State offensively couldn't really punish you in the ways that Oklahoma City might be able to. Even though Oklahoma City offensively has been an adventure, right,
Yeah.
so to speak. So I think Minnesota can definitely give them some burn, and I think they could present some real challenges for them. But I just continue to say I think Oklahoma City will win this series and be able to make it out of the finals.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%.
Yeah.
There's so many things that Oklahoma City I think has going working for them, right? You already talked
Mhm.
about it. You have a ton of counters with a double big lineup. You have perimeter, pests really that can really just get into the
Yeah.
grill of pretty much anybody that you throw out Minnesota. The only concern that I really have for the Thunder in this series is going to be Julius Randle, like point blank period. And I feel like Ant is going to get his, but I feel like if Julius Randle shows up in a big way, then the series might be over pretty
Yeah.
quickly
They
for
both
the
show up.
Thunder. Yeah.
Yeah. And Oklahoma City, again, after SGA, you don't have a lot of great elite shot creation either because
Hmm.
I think, Jalen Williams, he was great in game 7, but I think he'll continue to have some games where it's just going to be tough out there,
Yeah.
for him at times, right?
Yep.
So that's something that you're going to have to navigate as well. But with Oklahoma City, you do still have a lot of guys that can, swing the ball around and attack closeouts. You got Hartenstein, who can even kind of be sort of like a release valve in terms of a guy who can, move the ball around in a 5-out offense. So, yeah, like you said, double big should continue to be a factor because Minnesota, we know, has a bunch of options, as a big physical team. So
Yeah.
I'm pretty excited by this series. So I think it's going to be a good one. But I would still pick Oklahoma City to win. I just feel like the dominant team that we saw in the regular season hasn't been quite as consistent. We've seen it in there in some games, right? But I don't know. But I would still favor Oklahoma City in this one. Do you think the games will be as close?
Hmm.
Because I guess aside from this game and game two, right, all the other games were pretty down to the wire.
They might be down to the wire. That's actually a
Okay.
pretty good question. I feel like, defensively, both these teams have some great counters and are going to, give each other some huge problems. But I feel like there's probably going to be a couple games where Oklahoma City blows Minnesota out
Mhm.
of the water. And I feel like those are going to be the key games where it's like, all right, that's why they're going to win the series. But outside of that, the only reason it's going to be competitive is probably because Minnesota is going to make it a close game with, their prowess on both ends of the floor.
Yeah, exactly. And again, your vets for Oklahoma City need to continue to show up.
Yeah.
Caruso, again, they probably don't win this series without his contributions, right?
Agreed.
And again, like that continues to be a great trade. And again, we liked it for both teams, I would say. I think we
Hmm.
still liked it more for Oklahoma City, didn't dislike it for Chicago, but we loved it for Oklahoma City just from the fact that you got a vet, a guy who's a great fit, who fits into the culture of what this team wants to do on both ends of the floor, right?
Yeah.
So I just, the and again, like Oklahoma City, like you're still gonna probably face zone defensive possessions, but again, I think Minnesota has better individual defensive personnel from Denver, so I think you'll be able to see them kind of get away with, yeah, we don't mind sticking Jaden McDaniels one-on-one on this guy for stretches. So I think Minnesota will have that in their back pocket
Yeah.
for sure. But again, I think Oklahoma City still has the most advantages, I would say, out of both of these teams. But again,
Great.
regular season it was pretty even. But I would say again, I would favor Oklahoma City. But I
Yeah.
think Minnesota's got a little bit more offensive firepower collectively probably than Denver, right?
Yeah. I agree.
I don't know because I mean like I think that with Denver, the main thing is like you have Jokic, and then you're just kind of wondering who else is coming along for the ride. I mean, Minnesota, you could have literally nobody sometimes come along
Yeah.
for the ride. So I guess that's the concern. I just think 3-point shooting wise, I think it's a better
Oh
3-point
yeah,
shooting
big
team
time,
than
big
Denver.
time. Yeah,
So
I
I
agree.
think that
And you have a guy like
yeah,
Nas Reed coming off the bench,
yeah, and
DiVincenzo.
that'll
Like,
make
look at
it
Denver; they
yeah.
don't really have that.
Right, like you have a couple of guys who could come off the bench and hit 5 threes for you in a game, and
Right.
that can flip a game on its face, right? So that's the factor where I think this should still be competitive. But but again, like I think for Minnesota, it's going to be a little bit tougher for them to pull it off, but not impossible,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Then in the Eastern Conference, we already talked about that matchup. So if you want to kind of hear the full thoughts in totality, you can check out that previous episode. We both picked the Knicks in 7 because of the fact that we favor what the Knicks can do. Late in games offensively, even though the Pacers can do that as well. And part of it being a 7-game series is we think the Pacers have a great shot at being able to win this series. I would favor some of the Knicks guys like Brunson, in a big game 7 by the end of it. Even though like I said, Indiana is going to give them everything they can handle. Obviously, these two teams matched up last year in the second round, though, and I think for the Knicks, it's going to be probably a revenge factor, right? Because of the fact that we picked the Knicks to beat the Pacers last year, and then they got banged up by the end of the series, right? Pretty much everybody, unfortunately, couldn't really get through the end of it. But this is a different Knicks team now, right? And the Pacers, it's mostly the same team, but now they're a lot more comfortable with one another, right? And that's a big factor as well. And they've been showing up in these big games. So I think both series should be great series. And then obviously from there, obviously the winners of those make the NBA Finals. And we're going to, again, continues the streak of new winner every year, right? So what's kind of going on here that's kind of helped facilitate that?
I mean, it's what the league wanted, right? They wanted this parity, which I think is cool, right? I don't
Mhm.
I don't think I was cool either way with a dynasty or a parity. It doesn't really matter to me. But, it comes down
Right.
to the CBA. It comes down to the offseason. It comes down to the moves that you make as a team, right? And as an
Yeah.
organization. Because look at the teams that are left, right? Big swing moves, right? You
Mhm.
trade away a guy like let's look at Oklahoma City, right? You trade away Josh Giddey, who's kind of like not necessarily a franchise guy, but more so of a cornerstone of your franchise, right? Where it's like, people thought that he was going to be, there for pretty much the majority of his career, but they traded him away and got a win now move in terms of gaining some experience, a guy who's going to give you a notable impact on, specifically the defensive end, but can also contribute as a finisher on the offensive end. Cool. That's great, right? And then you look at Minnesota and New York involved in the same trade, actually, with Julius Randle, Karl Anthony Towns, right? Those are both kind of, I feel like with the Minnesota one, we looked at it a little bit differently. Didn't really think it was a win now move because, Towns was, very good in the postseason last year. But, for New York's perspective, it's like, whoa, like you go out and grab immediate talent that's going to, boost you
Mhm.
and probably take you further
Him and
than
Bridges.
last year. What'd
Yeah,
you
him
say?
and Bridges. Him
Exactly,
and
yeah.
Bridges.
So in New York, they did that with Bridges as well, right? So I feel like it comes down to off-season moves. Indiana as well, like they did some interesting things in the off-season as well. So shout out to
Yeah.
them. Um,
They re-signed all their guys, and then obviously they did the Siakam trade last year. But they brought most of their guys back that rewarded them for strong playoff runs. Like Siakam, they re-signed. Nemhard, they re-signed.
right,
I believe they re-signed McConnell. I think they re-signed Obi Toppin. So like
yeah,
a lot of the guys that were up for extensions, they gave them to him.
yeah. So that's what I think it comes down to is if you have a strong off-season and you're building on top of a great performance and a great season that you had the previous year, then you're probably gonna go pretty far in the playoffs. But that's
Yeah.
kind of what I think it is, and
The health, yeah, the health factor is important too, just because
yeah,
we have seen teams in the postseason that got kind of rattled by the injuries, and
sure,
that's kind of the tough part every year, right? Is that it's very difficult to, you got to get through an 82 game regular season, then you have to get through a 6 week postseason, right? And depending on your path, it might be a grueling, like say Denver, back to back game sevens, right? And that's kind of difficult to get through an entire postseason where you have to get through 7 game series potentially every round in order to win, right? Like
right,
let's say if Denver won this series and moved on against Minnesota, right? Like I don't think they would, if they were even able to beat Minnesota, it wouldn't have been a quick series. That would have gone pretty long, I would say.
yeah,
So that's a big part of, you got to take advantage of the opportunities, and you can't really just give away games. Like I know the Knicks had like a couple of games where they kind of just sort of gave them away, but like the must win ones, right? They took advantage and closed out all of them, right? Like
right,
Game 6 against Detroit looked like it was going away from them, and they continued to battle and fight back, and then close it out, right? Then obviously the 3 games that they beat, Boston, where they were down and they were trailing in all those games, right? And they were able to close those ones out. And they were able to kind of get the job done. And then obviously Oklahoma City pushed to the brink, right? But game 7 must win, and they showed
right,
up, and
yeah,
especially second quarter onward. So
yeah, exactly,
big from them.
yeah,
Yeah. So I think it's going to be really awesome to see how this postseason goes. I know obviously your pick, was for the Knicks. My pick was knocked out early.
yeah. It's
So
kind of wild, and
yeah,
like kind of going back to it because I don't even think we really touched on it too much. I mean, there wasn't really much to say from that
right.
perspective, like talking about the Knicks Celtics series because it
Yeah.
was kind of ruined by some injuries and stuff like that. But my God, like shout out to New York, bro. I
Mhm.
know I picked them, but I didn't really think they had it in them. Like I didn't
Right.
think that they were gonna. How about this? I picked them, but I didn't think it was gonna pan out like this. If that makes
Yeah.
sense, right? I didn't think this was gonna be the pathway, in terms of them beating a battered and bruised Celtics and prayers once again for the Tatum Achilles. I don't know what's
Yeah.
going on with Porzingis. That I think is something that
Yeah.
people aren't talking about in terms of
And then
just him not really playing and not being himself. That
yeah, and
probably
then I
hurt them
think
a
with
lot.
Jaylen Brown, right, they've kind of said that he's got a meniscus thing that he's got to take care of. So either
Right.
he either might have to have surgery to repair it or not. I don't know. I think
Right.
that's what they said, the other day.
Yeah, but dude, I don't know. The shout out to the Knicks. Hopefully they can get it done with Indiana, but that's going to be a crazy series. Super
Yeah.
crazy rivalry already in itself, right? And it's been kind of resurrected with Brunson and Halliburton. So, yeah, it's going to be wild. And I think we're in for a show for this
Mhm.
for the East and the Western Conference Finals. It's going to be
Yeah.
wild.
Yeah, like so you didn't obviously, you didn't pick Oklahoma City to win the title, but like did
Sure.
this series make you feel more confident about their potential to win it?
Yeah, I would say so because like say they say they beat Minnesota, which I think they will.
Mhm.
Not going to say it should be a cakewalk in the finals, but
Right.
you're going to be the
They're gonna
overwhelming favorite. You're going to be the
yeah,
overwhelming favorite. Either you face Minnesota or you either face Indiana or New York. Either way, you should win that series, win that title.
yeah. And then obviously for the Knicks, like yeah, like you said, you got to feel way better about the Knicks now going at this point than you would have gone into the play. Because again, like the funny thing is, we liked the roster, we liked the moves they made in the
Well, I
offseason.
picked them.
And and like I think a lot of people like thought that they were better like than say like a Cleveland or even like a Philly going into the season or Milwaukee, right? I think most people looked at them as a top 3 team
Mm-hmm.
in the Eastern Conference,
Mm-hmm.
and it just didn't feel like that for long stretches because of the fact that they were getting smoked by a lot of the top teams. I know they didn't have a great record against, teams with winning records, but again, team was built for the playoffs, right? And that was kind of the thing.
Wild.
Even though I didn't pick them to win it all or even beat Boston, I think we both felt like there was at least the potential for this team to look better in the playoffs because you look at, the collection of the wings, right? And obviously the Brunson piece and even Towns, right? Like with the way he's played, like you have so much talent and defensively, they figured a lot of stuff out. And then even the Robinson piece, because that was a key piece that we were hoping to see
Yeah.
during the regular season that we didn't really get to see. We've seen it way more in the playoffs than we saw in the regular season, and that has paid dividends because now you have a too big look to be able to match all these other teams. Like Oklahoma City's got two bigs. You can do that with the Knicks, right?
Yeah.
Minnesota's got two bigs. I guess you could say three. You can do that. So,
Yeah. Shout out to
super
New York.
impressive by them. Like, and that's kind of the thing. So I guess so would they be like I guess kind of the team that's impressed you the most so far through the postseason?
100%. And
Yeah,
it's like,
and then yeah,
the Detroit series is like, oh God, like that's why you
right,
were like that you would never pick that team to win the NBA
right,
finals because they got pushed, to the brink by freaking, for
right,
by Detroit. But then they come out and they show you why they made these
hmm
moves in the postseason or for the postseason in the Boston series, right? Because that was just
yes,
magical, right? To take
yeah,
to come back in those games and
yeah,
then steal both of them on the road is amazing, right? And
yeah,
like that
right,
that's what really I think has catapulted them in terms of like where I rank them and how I feel about them. Felt good
hmm
about them going into the postseason. Not like great though, even though they were the
right.
pick to win the title based off of the regular season. But now that I've seen them at full strength in the postseason, I'm like, these starters are amazing. What they provide on both ends of the floor, amazing. Like Jalen Brunson, yeah, he gets targeted, but they don't let that, deter them from their game plan. They play their
Right.
brand of basketball.
He's battling too. He's
And
not just like
yeah,
automatically conceding stuff.
right, right. And he's using his body because he does have like a stockier, heavier frame, which is good, right? Like that's kind of ideal for a guy, at that height, right? You need to have something going for you.
Held
And
up
their
like
bench
switch.
too. Their bench
Yeah,
hasn't been horrible, not as bad as I thought it was going to be. Like Deuce
yeah,
McBride showing up, like shout out to him.
yeah. I guess
That's about it.
yeah, and
Mitchell
and
Robinson
it's
too.
Yeah, and it's nice that they've been able to stagger some of these guys because, like, now you don't have to have a dominant Brunson game in order to win, which was the issue last year, right? With them, where like it felt like every game that they won, you had to have a really stellar Brunson game. I know he had a couple of games like against Philly last year, right, where he wasn't great and they were able to win, but even then, like those wins felt like you stole those games, right? Like
Right, right.
how that series went. But now, like, obviously he still has to be really good for them to win it all. But like, just you don't have to have him do that, be a superhuman every single game. Because even game two against Boston, he wasn't great. He showed up at the end of it, but a lot of the run initially was kind of by the supporting cast, and that's what you're looking for if you're the New York Knicks, right? Save your star from himself so that way it doesn't always have to be him, kind of doing everything. Right now you have a bunch of other guys who, are playing together and looking like
Yeah,
a
man.
really good team. Yeah, so I think definitely for sure that would be the team that's been I think the most impressive. What would we say would be a candidate for probably like least?
Least probably Oklahoma City.
Okay.
I know that might be kind of weird, but I feel like a lot of these teams have somewhat overachieved except
Mhm.
for Oklahoma City, right? We expected them to be in the Western Conference Finals.
Mhm.
Didn't expect Minnesota to be here at all. Granted, the
Right.
pathways are different for each team.
Mhm.
Indiana, I didn't expect, going into the season and going into the postseason either, right?
Right.
So that's kind of how I feel like. And granted, it doesn't take anything away from what the Oklahoma City Thunder did. I'm still very high on them. Still think they're going to be
Mhm.
representing the West, but I feel
Mhm.
like it's all in who you play. They played a very tough opponent. That opponent also played up a little bit in terms of pushing it to a game 7. But I
Mhm.
feel like they could have handled the Nuggets in 5 games. I just feel like that was a reality that they let slip through their hands because they didn't play their best brand of basketball throughout that 7 game series. There's a reason why it went 7, and it wasn't just Denver being great, right? Like it was
Yeah.
also Oklahoma City stinking it up and certain players on that team not really showing up and doing their job.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. It felt like that there was some things that were left on the table that, like
Right.
you said, could have probably made it a more decisive series. But hey, it's better to be there than to not be there.
Yeah, I
So,
agree. Yeah.
that's and I think, like you said, I think they're still better for it that they got pushed to the brink because
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
last year, right? They kind of got beat off the floor. I mean, I know that series was not a blowout. Like there were a number of close games, but a lot of people thought Oklahoma City would win that series against Dallas, right? And then,
They should have.
you had, yeah, and then they ended up not, right? Like you got some poor performances from some of the guys that you got much better performances this time around. What do you think about Chet Holmgren, right?
Mm.
Like what do you have you thought about his performance, in this series, right? Because he's obviously, kind of looked at as the third guy for Oklahoma City, right? So what have we seen from him that we've liked, if anything?
Well, right. This is year 2 for him, right? And that's the tough part to judge these guys on is they're so young, right? People forget it's only J Dub's what 3rd year, and this is Chet's
Right.
2nd year.
Yeah.
But in his
First year
second
was
year,
Boston.
yeah, but his 2nd year, I've been kind of up and down on him. I feel like he should be playing at a better level. Granted, he did miss a lot of time in the regular season, but throughout the postseason, I mean, like averages wise, it's not horrible.
Mhm.
But I feel like it could be better, right? It's better than last year. Let's get that out of the way in terms of especially the 3-point shooting because that was
Yeah.
something that was horrible last year. But I feel like
Mhm.
you could, in theory, get more from him. He's his not second overall pick. I feel like he should be a little bit further along. However, what he provides defensively, I think, is the coolest part about his game, and
Mhm.
offensively, he does fit this team very well. But I feel like he would benefit a little bit more from a more traditional point guard, more of a table setting kind of guy, more so than a
Mhm.
guy like Shea. So it is kind of all in who you're playing with, but
Yeah.
underwhelming, but not
Mhm.
bad to the point where if they lose is going to be on him. If I'm making
Right. Like,
any
I think
sense,
defensively, he's doing his job. It
yeah,
just kinda comes down to, like, can the jumper fall
right,
a little bit more consistently. I
hmm
think that's kind of the main thing you're looking for, right? Like, he was 0 for 3 from 3 in this game, and it really didn't matter, right?
right.
But, I mean,
But that's the type of stuff
yeah,
that I'm talking about. Like if he's bad, it's probably not going to show as much if it's like one of the other guys, which I think does speak a little bit to his role on the
right.
team, where he might
Yeah,
not be,
it's not
you
as
know,
loud.
exactly, but he makes up for it in other interesting ways, like defensively, playmaking, rebounding, all the
Right.
little things, right?
Yeah. Yeah, because 'cause you're not looking to him as much for creation as some of the other guys. So, like,
Right.
A bad Jalen Williams game or, what is very loud, right, in
Yeah.
terms of how
It's going to
bad it
show
is.
in the score.
Yeah, exactly. And then I guess last but not least, I guess before we wrap this up, like in terms of stocks, right?
Mm.
Like, which stocks like are we kind of like going up on in terms of some of these players in the postseason? Because I know we kind of mentioned some of the teams, but just in terms of some of the players, which guys have kind of impressed you? I would say the most.
Um, Probably Halliburton. That's probably the guy that I think it comes down to Halliburton and Julius Randle, right? Those are the two
Yeah.
guys that have really impressed me. And I know,
Mhm.
it's matchup dependent, but Halliburton has shut up a lot of freaking people, right? Because going into
Yeah.
this into the postseason, he was voted most overrated, and he has pretty much silenced that by being, the steady captain of that Indiana offense, which is so fun to
Mhm.
watch, right? And I know like a lot of people don't really know about that team a whole lot, but if you watch their games, they're super exciting and super
Yeah,
amazing to watch. And it's because of what, it starts with him, right? Because he is the captain, he's the orchestrator of that offense. He finds the guys,
great,
and
well constructed team.
very well constructed team. They're deep. They have a bunch of stuff going for them. But yeah, Halliburton has been amazing throughout the postseason, and I think it's going to continue in that Knicks series, which is what scares me, as somebody who did pick the Knicks to win it. But moving on to the West, I feel like Julius Randle is the other guy, right? Because we already talked
Yeah,
about it last episode. We've really been talking about it every time he has a good game. It's a guy that had a horrible playoff reputation going into the postseason, but has showed up, and he's been a huge reason as to why Minnesota is even in the position that they're in because, of what he's able to do. He's super versatile, on both ends of the floor, engaged on defense for once. That's the cool part. This is like the first time in his career in the postseason where I've really seen him actively engaged on the defensive end and not checking out on the offensive end as well. And, he's not really getting frustrated, right? He's using his strengths, which are actually many,
right.
against the opponent, and he's a walking mismatch. Been saying that for since the season started, right? And he hasn't really had a stinker, and the 3-point shot is falling, and that helps out the rest of the team, right? Because if his 3-point shot is falling, that opens up lanes for Anthony Edwards to drive. Granted, he hasn't really been finishing them a lot, but
Right.
if both those guys are on fire, it elevates the team tremendously, and they're way better than how they played in the regular season.
Yeah, and you can see the passing and
Yeah,
playmaking too. Would there be anybody, I guess, from some of these eliminated teams, right, that your stock would be higher on, that you're kind of looking out for now?
eliminated. That's a tough one because I feel like a lot of those guys were somewhat proven already. Like their stock
Yeah,
was
fair enough.
like Jokic's stock for me was always
Right,
pinnacle. I guess me
right.
personally, I guess it was a friendly reminder of how good Kawhi can be
Hmm.
if fully healthy. But
Right.
then the game 7 happened,
Hmm.
or was it game 7 or 6? I can't remember.
6, the Clippers won in a blowout. 7 was the one where the Clippers got blown out.
So 7 happened, and I was like, I don't know, but um, yeah, I would probably go with Kawhi. That might seem like a cop out answer, but yeah, probably Kawhi.
Like, in terms of, like, oh, yeah, in terms of eliminated teams. Yeah,
Yeah,
because like you said, like, say, if we're looking at, right, like, Lakers, I don't think anybody's stock really went up, right?
no,
Like, we kinda yeah, like, Clippers, I guess you could say Kawhi, but we already knew that.
yeah.
And then, like, Jokic, same thing. Cleveland, I don't think anybody's stock
I
really went up
think
in that
personally,
sense.
mine went down a lot on those
Yeah,
guys. And the funny thing is, like, I love a lot of their
yeah, and that
players,
was
right?
kind of my next question, in terms of getting into that and then kinda looking around, like, Boston, stock up? I mean,
Not
n
really. I mean, maybe
really. I mean, like,
Tatum.
Tatum had an awesome game before he got hurt, but, like,
Yeah,
our stock was, I think, higher on him than most
big
people
time, big
anyway.
time. Yeah,
So, yeah, so that didn't really change anything
yeah,
for me, right? Houston, I guess, yeah, like, stock was up on Amen Thompson, right? Because
yeah,
but we are again, it's another guy we already liked.
yeah.
So, not really yeah, not really a shocker or surprise,
Hmm.
there. Memphis, no.
No,
No one,
no,
right, in terms of their stock, I would say.
yeah, not a
And
lot of
then
risers. I feel like.
yeah, yeah, and like you said, some of it is kinda just, like, based off of, like, stuff that we kinda already knew and
Right.
expected, but, still. And then, looking else around, Bucks, no,
No.
right? No one's stock went up. I mean, I guess Giannis, like, all respect went up, for out,
Yeah.
but it was already high. Orlando, Paolo, right, for sure. Paolo for sure, which again, already high. And then I guess stock down in terms of eliminated teams, right? Like I guess we can start with Cleveland,
Yeah.
right? Are there any specific guys who your stock would be lower on, for them?
Garland. That
You
that's
said Garland?
Yeah,
You said
Garland.
Garland?
Garland for sure. That would be
Mhm.
one guy. Donovan
Mhm.
Mitchell, I feel like we have to kind of loop him in there too, because if I'm
Mhm.
going to criticize Embiid the way that I do in terms of his playoff um, happenings, then I would have to criticize Donovan Mitchell as well. You have a great team, but granted,
Mhm.
health wise, like god dang, like what more can you ask the guy to do? Right? He's playing hobbled. But even then, I felt like in the playoffs, those guys were very selfish. I didn't really like the way that they played. Granted, I guess it was Indiana's way of kind of baiting them into playing that. reverted kind of Cavs style basketball when the two first got together. But I don't know, just very disgusted with how both those guys really played, right?
Oh yeah, the Cade stock also, I guess, should mention that one went up.
Oh yeah, that's a riser. That's another riser for sure.
Yeah, exactly. And then after that, like you said, did your Ant stock go up at all, or is it kind of just about the same?
No, it's leveled out. I think it hasn't really moved because
Yeah.
I haven't seen him explode for like that masterclass playoff game.
Mhm.
He's had his
Right.
moments and he's had quarters and stretches where, he
Mhm.
takes over a game and wins it, but he hasn't
Yeah.
had that performance that makes me go,
Mhm.
yeah, stock
I think
up.
if he does it against the Thunder, I think for sure that
Yeah,
stock will go up.
I agree.
Because I think like for Golden State, like the Lakers one, yeah, you can. It's impressive because we didn't pick the Wolves to win the series, right? And then Warriors, it's like no Steph,
Mm-hmm.
so that's a different look. But then this one, I think, is the one where his stock. I mean, yeah, his stock, I think for sure will go up with everyone.
But I already had
But
him
yeah,
in such a high category though. That's the
right, yeah,
tough part.
exactly.
Maybe some people had him lower than us, but
Mhm.
I feel like you and
Yeah.
I both have been singing his praises for a while now.
Mhm. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think that would kind of be the big thing there for sure, right? So then again, these are all conversations that will probably continue to happen, right? Because I think we'll revisit this after the conference finals and kind of look at, once these teams, are in and out of their series, right? Who, that's kind of like a nice thing I think to look at.
Yeah, for sure.
Because some of these guys, right, like there's recency bias based off of how well they're playing right now. But say one of these guys has a stinker of a series, right? Then obviously, the vultures will come out for them.
Oh yeah, big time.
Yeah. So now in terms of closing it out, just in terms of just some more happenings around the NBA, not a whole lot to talk about. Obviously, there's still, some talks about like from Mark Stein, the Bucks are hopeful that Giannis won't request a trade. Obviously, I believe online he was doing like a Q&A session, right, where a lot of people were asking him different questions, and he did mention he likes playing in New York, amongst some other things. So I think that's kind of a funny, scenario for potentially what could happen.
Right.
But what do you think about that one?
I mean, it's kind of funny.
Mhm.
We're kind of talking about stuff that it's not necessarily like tinfoil hat level bad, but
Right.
it is more so theory stuff, right? Because we don't know
Right.
if the guy is gonna leave. He might not want to leave because it is a good, I guess, area to be in terms of your career. You are certified franchise guy. You won a title there. You have potential to win some more if they can actually build a competent team around you. But at the same time, might be time to go to a different market, a bigger one, a better situation in the here and now. Who knows? Like, it's really up to him, right? But I mean, it is kind of funny because I mean, realistically, you can't go to
Mhm.
the Knicks, so that kind of means like
Well, he
Brooklyn.
could, but not right now. I think
That's
that
what I'm
would
saying.
probably, yeah, like if they got smoked by Indiana, then that would probably, then maybe that might be more likely. But even then, I'd be curious to see what they would do. But we can get to that potentially. If the Knicks get
We'll get
eliminated.
there when we get there.
Right, exactly. But just a very funny
Yeah.
situation. But regardless, yeah, that pretty much covers all of the topics that we have for today's episode. Of course, continue to, look at our polls, on Instagram, right? And obviously we're always gonna talk about those and kind of just go over the results just because of how, how these discussions are. The last poll that we put out was who was gonna win game 7. 73% picked the Nuggets to win. Oh, that did not happen. Now,
Oh
of
man.
course, I think this was before the Gordon stuff was known, but even then, like you could, I think you could see him get hurt, and I think we put this out, and we at least knew he had a hamstring injury because that was official. We just didn't know that it was a grade 2, but yeah, so that was one where not a lot of people were on our side.
Right.
All the so just kind of wild. But either way, yeah, we appreciate all of that. If you want to contribute to these polls, go on IG at the OBT podcast. And, always kind of, we always have some responses that you can choose. Leave a comment on our videos and we will read it at the end, discuss it. And also continue to like and subscribe to our content and our channel so that way we can help it grow. We appreciate all the attention and support. Hopefully we have a great conference finals. We'll see you next episode.